This podcast is for general information only. It is not intended as a substitute for general healthcare services. If you have medical conditions, you need to see your doctor. Use of this information is at the user's own risk. Welcome to FitRx with Dr. Greg Dennis. Join me as we challenge the standard sick model of healthcare. This is your source for everything health, wellness, prevention, fitness, biohacking, and more. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of FitRx. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Dennis. And if you have listened to this podcast for any time, you know I talk a lot about longevity. It's really kind of the foundation of what I do. And so because I'm always looking at that kind of stuff, reading about that, I guess is how I found my next guest. His name is JP Medved. And he is the co-owner of a site called Longevity Advice. And it's pretty much what it sounds like. But he really has just dug into all the research and kind of summarizes it on a website. And he, breaks it down into top supplements for longevity, rates the top longevity conferences, top longevity podcast, which mine isn't on there, but hopefully I can change his mind after today and get mine listed on there. So, just everything longevity. And so he talks about nutrition and even has his self-care routine, which I'm sure we'll get into, and he goes into very explicit detail about what he does personally, and so again we'll get into that, and I'm sure some supplements and all things longevity. So, JP, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Greg. Great to be here.
Yeah, well, first, I guess tell us a little bit about you, kind of what your background is, and how you got interested in longevity.
Sure. I'm out here in Colorado, kind of born and raised. Went away to school and studied business. So I don't have any kind of medical background. I worked in marketing, kind of content and digital marketing before starting up Longevity Advice. But really got interested in longevity through science fiction. Big, huge nerd on kind of any kind of sci-fi you can name, and so much of it deals with kind of vastly longer lifespans and health spans, and so that made me very interested in kind of wanting to understand how we could make something like that happen today, and kind of bring that future more into the present. So when I left my previous company, me and a former coworker got together and started talking about what we wanted our next thing to be. And I had been kind of following the longevity space for a fair while, Aubrey de Grey, and kind of seeing bits and pieces here and there. And it was something that I had decided I was passionate about. And so I talked about this with her, and she'd also been interested in fitness for a long time, and kind of health. And so we decided that we'd kind of start this thing together, and kind of explore the topic.
Well, very nice. So you had that interest, and then it kind of developed into this website, Longevity Advice. So I guess kind of talk more about that, if you will, kind of how
Yeah,
that started, how it's evolved, and what you do there today.
for sure. I mean, it basically started by me wanting to do all this research for myself to understand, what is actually possible now. The focus of the website is very much on kind of the actionable things that people can do now, not 5 years from now or 10 years from now, but what are things that can actually have an impact on your longevity at this point in time. So I'd want to do this research for myself anyways, and I thought, as while I'm doing this, why not just kind of write it up and put it out there for other folks as well, and try and be as useful to as many people as possible. And luckily, we've had a lot of folks discover the website and discover the content, and really get a lot of help from it.
Okay. All right. Well, very nice. So it looks like, as I mentioned in earlier, that you cover a range of things, nutrition, supplements, all that.
Mhm.
I mean, is there one particular, I mean, certain things you focus on, or is it just a little bit of everything that's related,
Yeah,
to longevity? So,
yeah. So we've kind of taken a linear approach to when we first started, we broke down what we kind of thought were the main components of longevity. So um, uh, diet, exercise, sleep, supplementation, and measuring all of that was another kind of key one. And so as the site's gone on, we've kind of taken each of those categories in turn and really tried to kind of dive into and learn everything about them before moving on to the next one. So the first kind of big section we published was all on self measurement, quantified self, biomarkers, all the tests that you should be aware of in order to understand um, how you're doing health wise and if longevity interventions are actually having a positive or a negative impact on you. So we started with that, and we moved into diet. Um, and now we're kind of moving into more of the intervention stage in terms of we started looking at heat therapy, cold therapy, and now we're really going to start diving into supplements soon.
yeah, cool. Yeah, I noticed on there you have some stuff about sauna, so you're a
Yep.
man after my own heart there.
Oh yeah,
So,
yeah.
um,
I kind of mentioned it in the article, but I wrote the sauna article after I did the one on cold therapy
mm,
and cold plunges, and I was much more impressed with the depth of scientific evidence around heat therapy compared to cold therapy. I think you get a lot of Andrew Huberman types really talking up cold therapy and cold plunges, and while there's some evidence there that it's beneficial, it doesn't seem as beneficial as heat therapy, and there's not as much research around it compared
yeah.
to things like sauna use.
Yeah, I do both, but I'm a huge fan of my sauna. My listeners know that. I mean, I would not be without my sauna. I have one at my house, and if
Is it
hopefully I never.
infrared or
It is not. It is the
traditional?
traditional. So,
Okay, nice.
there are some benefits to infrared. I talk to people about that, but
Good.
I personally prefer the traditional, just because I like it just really freaking hot, and
Nice. Well, that's great for you.
yeah, and I can stay in. It's less time. The infrared, you really, I feel like you need to stay in a little bit longer to get the
Right.
benefits. And with mine and the big, not that we have to focus all our time on sauna, but the big study in Finland, I'm sure you're familiar with. I mean, that was done.
Oh yeah.
Using a traditional sauna, and but there are benefits to infrareds for sure. So I mean, I think they're both great, but
Yeah.
definitely a big fan of sauna. But well, let's talk about so, and this could be a long conversation, but talk about some of the things you've learned personally as you've just. I mean, that's kind of what you do is you just spend time researching all this. Which how cool is that? Because this is a
Sure.
passion of mine. And I kind of live it out. As a doctor. As I go and helping people in that way. But I don't necessarily have time to dive into all the data.
Mhm.
But talk about what you've learned over the years.
Yeah. I mean, kind of the first thing I've learned is how, uh, I guess, easy but time consuming it is to learn this stuff on your own. I think a lot of people get intimidated by scientific research papers and things, but if you actually start to read them, eh, many of them are very easy to understand, and you can really get a feel for, how is this experiment designed, and what are we actually looking at in terms of real benefit. And it's amazing how you'll read um, kind of more mainstream media news coverage on scientific studies, and then actually go look at the study, and it doesn't say anything like what was presented in the article or the news story. Um, but yeah, in general, in terms of kind of longevity things, I've discovered a lot of kind of interesting, I guess, hacks, if you will. But a lot of other things are kind of off the beaten path in terms of, I guess, mainstream medicine. Um, for instance, I was talking with some friends of mine who are doctors out here in Colorado, and they're general practitioners. And I was talking about the Grail Gallery test, which I'm sure you and your listeners are aware of. It's a multi-cancer early detection blood biopsy test,
Mhm.
which looks at cell-free DNA in the bloodstream to determine if there's cancer and where that might be from. And they'd never heard of it. This was, maybe a year or two after the paper on it came out. Um, And so, uh, you get to kind of get a sense of what's the cutting edge here, and what are things that hopefully will eventually get into the mainstream before they're there. Um,
And
so yeah.
you've kind of hit on a really big topic there, which we don't necessarily have to go down that rabbit hole. But as a family practice doctor, and I've kind of now, I mean, I'm on the other side of it. But when you start getting things that actually make people well, the quote traditional doctors aren't going to know about it or hear about it. Because it doesn't really fit into what I call the sick model of healthcare. Because if
Hmm.
everybody's well, it doesn't make everybody or anyone any money. And I always emphasize that there's not bad people. The doctors are very well meaning, but it's just they're in a broken system. And
Yeah.
so anyway, it just goes along with, yeah, they haven't heard. I mean, if I start talking to another general practitioner about peptides and different things, they're like, what are you talking about?
Right,
So
right. They don't follow that at all.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, I mean, and uh, talking about uh, doctors, once I started digging into all this stuff, when we were kind of really looking at biomarkers and things, I went to my annual doctor's appointment and I asked, hey, in addition to kind of the regular blood tests, can I get a high sensitivity C-reactive protein test? And he flat out said no. No, you're too young, you don't have indications, whatever, whatever. Um, and I of course had done the research. I understood the importance of it as an inflammation marker, how you could use it in some of these biological age tests like Levine's phenotypic age. Um, Man, and I think he was so used to people that hadn't done the research, heard one thing on something online, and wanted all these expensive tests. So there's definitely a disconnect, I think, in the mainstream medical community and folks who are actually passionate about health.
yeah, for sure. My listeners heard me talk about this before, but vitamin D is a great example of that. I mean, most people don't get their vitamin D levels checked, and I mean
Right,
that to
right.
me is just mind blowing. I mean, because it is
Yeah.
so important, and especially if you have any kind of autoimmune disease. I mean, we really need to optimize those vitamin D levels, and really for everybody. But so, I
Well,
mean,
and
it
especially,
should be very routine, and the fact that it's not is just like I said, it's mind blowing to me.
yeah. I mean, you'd think after COVID that would have changed for
Hmm.
the better, but I have not seen that evidence yet.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Uh,
Um, Well, I guess let's start with diet.
yeah.
So nutrition is probably going to be the most debatable thing.
Oh yeah.
There's all kinds of different camps out there, and all of them will swear that their diet is the best. The healthiest diet and the best for longevity. Um, my opinion as a practitioner is it depends. I don't think that there's necessarily one diet. It depends on what we're treating, what our goals are. Are you starting off with insulin resistance? Do you need to lose weight? Do you have other diseases? Do you have autoimmune diseases? Which, we're going to have to do more of a restrictive type of diet. So, what has your research shown specifically on longevity and diet and nutrition?
For sure. Yeah, I kind of went into this with a I don't want to say a closed mind, but certainly with some preconceptions, which I think everybody picks up just in the general atmosphere around diet. I had been in kind of the tech space, so obviously, keto and paleo and carnivore were all really big in that space, and there's a lot of um, people kind of talking up those diets, and I'd done both paleo and keto for years at that point. Um, Felt like it was doing well, but again, I wasn't really measuring it. And so, we did a deep dive into kind of all the different diet patterns. So we looked at vegan and vegetarian, we looked at Mediterranean, we looked at keto and low carb and paleo, and we kind of looked into the why there's so much disagreement in the science of nutrition. Kind of interestingly, I think there's a couple reasons that seem to be the driving factors, which are so many diet studies are observational population studies, which, as you know, are kind of seen as generally lower quality than a randomized controlled trial, where you can kind of control all the variables. You're able to really make causation inferences versus population studies, which A lot of times they're kind of backward looking, or they're based on survey data, or um, and there's so many different variables in there that if even if you try to deal with those, it's likely you'll have some kind of confounding factor that's going to throw off your results. So I think that's a big reason why nutritional science is so confusing. And then the other one, just like you said, everybody's different. I mean, genetically, in terms of environment and goals, the human body, different human bodies react differently to different types. People have allergies to certain things that other people don't, and genetically, people react differently to different food sources or whatever. So what works great for somebody may work terribly for somebody else, or actively harm them. And then I think there's a great study which I've now quoted in a bunch of articles. It's basically like, we looked at 800,000 people and meals, and found that no one dietary pattern recommendation would work for all of them, basically. Yeah. So you get all these people with kind of these almost religious militant beliefs about diet. And I think the truth of it is it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
yeah.
so what, I'll ask you more about your regimen, but
Yeah.
what, through all your research and what have you kind of evolved to for yourself personally?
Yeah, so like I said, I kind of started on the keto paleo train, which I still believe has a lot of value as an eating pattern, especially for folks with diabetes, those kinds of metabolic disorders. What I kind of evolved to after doing all this research is more of a Mediterranean pattern diet. The with all of the stuff that we looked into, that one seemed to have the largest weight of scientific evidence suggesting that it improves longevity.
Hmm.
And now whether it's specific ingredients within that diet, whether it's that diet combined with other elements of lifestyle in terms of exercise and social behavior and community and whatever, um, as I said, very hard to kind of pull out all the confounding factors in these observational population studies. But with all those caveats, it does seem like the preponderance of the evidence suggests that a Mediterranean style diet will likely improve longevity, or at least health span.
Hmm. So you're eating a lot of fish,
Yeah, so it's like it's
vegetables.
exact fish, poultry, a lot of olive oil. I do 4 tablespoons of olive oil every day. Try to take it raw. Tea and coffee, tisanes like rosemary and other kind of anti-inflammatory herbs and things. Carbs tend to be more complex carbohydrates, so not talking everybody's like, oh, you can have bread on Mediterranean diet. Yes, but it's rare. Typically, you're having something more like beans or sweet potatoes or lentils. Actually, have a fair amount of evidence suggesting that they're pro longevity as well.
Mhm.
So if you're having carbohydrates, it tends to be more complex carbs that have a lot of fiber in them as well. So yeah. Now, obviously there's some days it's easier to stick to that than others, but that's kind of the general trend that I'm aiming for.
Okay. So I feel like, and you can, tell me what you've learned in all your readings, but the foundational things, which is going to be diet, uh, exercise,
Hmm.
sleep,
Hmm.
stress management, those kinds of things, they probably are the biggest needle movers for just health and longevity. You've got to have all those basics, and then everything else is just maybe icing on the cake, when we
Hmm.
talk about supplements and different things. And I would throw, I do a lot of hormone optimization, and I would throw that in there. But is that kind of what you found in your research that, to back that up or?
Yeah, I think it's generally kind of a, 80/20 principle.
Yeah.
If you don't get those foundational things right, it's not really worth it diving deep into the supplements or
Yeah. Yeah.
um the last 10%, trying to optimize
Yeah.
on a shaky foundation is not gonna help you any. Yeah, and I think that's I forget who, Peter T or somebody said, if exercise were a pill, it would be the best longevity intervention we have, bar
Mhm.
none. Better
Yeah.
than rapamycin, better than metformin, better than all these things you've heard about.
Hmm. Yeah.
Exercise.
Yeah. 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 Agreed. So on that, what kind of exercise do you do after kind of researching all this? What have you found to be like the best that you do personally?
Yeah. So, I haven't done we haven't really started the deep dive on exercise. That's going to be next after
Oh,
supplements
okay.
here. So, but just kind of being in the space and learning about it, kind of zone two and high intensity stuff seems to be pretty well correlated with longevity.
Mhm.
Right now, I'm primarily doing resistance training with weights in terms of, it's great for building bone density, preventing sarcopenia as you age, and all kinds of benefits to that as well. And that I'm doing, three times a week with kind of longer, kind of low impact exercise every other day. So walks with a dog or hikes or swimming or whatever. Things that just keep you moving, keep you outside, and uh, keep you physical.
Okay. So let's talk about supplements. So you've researched that a little bit, and again, I really feel like if you don't have the foundational things there, that I don't know that supplements are going to get you very far.
Yeah.
But they can be helpful. Um, what have you found in the way of supplements? And there's so many supplements out there. And what I tell people, many of them are good,
Yeah.
but you have to kind of pick your poison, if you will, because I feel like it's unrealistic, to take everything out there that's going to have benefit,
Right.
unless can't remember her name. I interviewed. She wrote a book on longevity, and I interviewed her on my podcast. Um,
Uh, Laura Kaufman.
that's it, Dr. Kaufman. Yeah, and her regimen, like she went through all the supplements she was on, and it was just like, holy cow. And
Yeah.
anyway, all good things, but I just think that's not realistic for most people.
Yeah, and
Um,
she's certainly done the research, and my guess is, and I've been kind of working on kind of a mental framework for how do you select supplements, basically. So what do you look for in terms of efficacy, evidence, availability, et cetera. And the main things I would probably start with are what's on the ITP, which is NIH's Interventions Testing Program, which is a program across, I think, three different labs that are geographically distributed using, I think it's heterogeneous mice, testing different potential longevity interventions. So they're trying to replicate this across multiple labs, across multiple different strains of mice. So they're kind of the gold standard for scientific rigor when it comes to longevity interventions. And the ones that they've looked at, the ones that seem to have the most efficacy include rapamycin, 8-carbose, 17 alpha estradiol, a couple others, aspirin specifically for males, low dose aspirin. So, starting with that, but then also looking at, there may be things out there that have a lot of promise that don't yet have the scientific rigor. So you want to look at what's maybe effect size. So instead of the number of studies that show an effect, maybe there's fewer studies, but the effect size is higher or better. So there's some promising ones out there like calcium AKG, berberine, that which is kind of a natural version of metformin, for
mhm,
instance. Kind of looking at that, but then also thinking through um, in terms of what are these supplements actually, what are they doing in the body, mechanistically? What is the mechanism by which they are increasing lifespan? And a lot of times, some of these, it's hard to know, but generally, it seems like a lot of them are operating on the mTOR or the AMPK pathways, which are, mTOR is mammalian target of rapamycin. It's the kind of the growth pathway,
mhm,
and then AKG is kind of the repair pathway. And only one of those can be operating at any one time within a cell. So generally, if you're reducing mTOR and increasing not AKG, sorry, AMPK, um, then you're clearing out dead cells, you're clearing out broken organelles and things like that, and that tends to be correlated with longevity. So long-winded answer of saying if you're taking 10 pills but they're all doing the same thing,
Hmm.
you may be better off just taking one or two, because they're not, there's only so much you can gain by having AMPK all the way up and mTOR all the way down, for
Hmm.
instance.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
so yeah,
definitely, yeah, that's a whole kind of debate, because I definitely think there's a balance there. Because
oh,
if
for
you never
sure.
have
You don't
any
want to,
mTOR, you're not going to grow muscle. We know muscle
exactly.
is tied to longevity
Yep.
bone strength and all that. And so
Well, again,
that's one of those
preventing,
definitely, yeah, you got
yeah,
to be
preventing
balanced. So,
sarcopenia and
yeah,
all,
yeah,
well, and yeah, muscle has all sorts of other positive
yeah.
effects other
Metabolic,
than that.
things.
Exactly,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, talk about when I glanced at your regimen, it looks like you're on quite a few supplements, but some of
Yeah.
usually when people ask me, which I get asked often, my top two supplements are vitamin D and magnesium.
Yep.
I don't know that I heard you mention magnesium, but to talk about your regimen and maybe just give us the highlights and what you feel is important from
Yeah, for
what
sure.
you take. Yeah.
I've got kind of a mix of I guess you'd call mTOR supporting and AMPK supporting supplements. And I'll take different ones or different amounts on exercise days versus non-exercise days. For instance, taurine I'll take more on an exercise day. But yeah, I'm so the the other kind of thing in my mental framework of supplements is not just efficacy and things, but also safety. There's so many supplements that people start taking, and then you find out later, oh, there's an issue here. It may cause whatever. Um, I don't actually take NMN right now, which is an NAD precursor that a lot of people take that I know, David Sinclair's kind of really talked up because there's some decent research suggesting that it might preferentially feed existing cancer cells. So if you don't have cancer, it's kind of a good preventative, but if you do, those cells might grow faster if you take it, for instance. And there's all these kind of little things that you discover as you're doing this research. Like niacin, for instance. If you take too much niacin, there was a recent paper that came out that kind of excess, like spillover niacin metabolites can be oncogenic, can kind of promote and cause cancer. So you want to take it, but not past a certain point. You don't want to kind of overdose on niacin, for instance. Um, so a lot of the stuff that I'm taking, I've looked into in terms of how widespread is this, or how many people are taking this, how long have people been taking this, how much do we know about it, et cetera. So for instance, glucosamine has been taken by, hundreds of millions of people over decades, with very little, if any, negative side effects. And there's some good research suggesting that glucosamine is an exercise mimetic, that it, can potentially increase lifespan, as well. So I'm right now at my age kind of focused on the low risk. Even if the efficacy isn't maybe as high as something like an NMN, the risk is much lower. And as I age and these things get better understood, my plan is to start adding in more of those. So yeah, that's just kind of the mental framework that I approach this from. So some of the supplements I'm taking are specifically for cholesterol. I recently had a blood test, and cholesterol numbers are moving in the wrong direction. So I'm kind of working on. So for instance, I'm taking berberine, I think I mentioned, along with red yeast rice, and astaxanthin, which all have kind of good anti-inflammatory and have been shown to have positive cholesterol effects.
Mm.
Um, Astaxanthin is also very good for skin health, and I recently found out both my parents now have had skin cancers. Luckily, both have been dealt with positively, but I'm clearly prone to it. I live in Colorado. There's a lot of sun. We're high altitude, so UV damage is very real. So I take astaxanthin as kind of a preventative for something like that.
Yeah, and I
Um,
would say again, this is a whole not to go down this rabbit hole, but yeah, you're obviously very metabolically healthy. You're very aware of all this, and in my opinion, that's a big cause of a number of these things, including cancer. Not all the time, but and even, cholesterol, again, that's, I've had specific podcasts on cholesterol.
Mhm.
My view is it's way overhyped. It's a complicated issue, so I shouldn't even probably make that statement, because I'm not going to say you should just always ignore it.
Yeah.
But I feel like studies are pretty clear that if you're metabolically healthy, that cholesterol is, even if it's high, it's probably not a big deal. Now you can confirm that by checking particle sizes and, and different
Yeah.
things. But anyway,
And
that's a whole nother topic there. So
no, well, and I mean, going back to the importance of testing, our cholesterol tests, they're not even really measuring the main the main risk factor, right? The main risk factor is soft plaque or plaque buildup in your arteries. It's not necessarily the cholesterol, which we think kind of may lead to that. Um, but we're not even measuring the actual thing. And now we do have the tools to do that. So I went and got a coronary artery calcium score. I'm planning on getting a CAMT. I forget the actual name of it, but it measures coronary artery calcium is a imaging that
mhm,
measures kind of calcification within your
sure,
arteries.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but there's now another measure that another imaging measure that will do the same thing for soft plaque. So I'm planning on getting that just to know, and see if I really do need to be as rigorous in this regimen,
Mm.
um, and what impact this higher cholesterol might actually be having.
Well, what else do you feel like is important that, I mean, you've got all kind of things, on the website.
Yeah.
I mean, you even got
Uh,
some longevity things for dogs and
Yeah, we have a dog and he's a giant breed and they're not known for living long. So I wanted to kind of really dive into dog longevity as well. And turns out there's a lot of similarities with
uh-huh.
with dogs and humans. They kind of co-evolved with us. They live in our environments, so they suffer a lot of the same morbidities that we do, and a lot of the same things that seem to work for humans also probably work for dogs. So, I do caloric restriction for my dog, give him olive oil every day,
Interesting.
feed him a high salmon diet, make sure he's getting exercise. As they say, if your dog is overweight, then you need to exercise more. So yeah, kind of did a deep dive into that. I
Yeah.
think with
That,
with companies like
uh,
Loyal coming around, there's a big interest in pet longevity as well.
yeah. Is that do you have a specific dog food that you use to get the salmon, or what do you, if you don't mind me asking?
You know, that was actually the hardest thing to kind of do the research on because a lot of the commercial kibbles are kind of cooked at a high heat, and that can create advanced glycation end products or AGEs, which there's a decent amount of research suggesting that those are kind of cancer promoting, and can have all kinds of negative effects in humans, and so you would assume the same in dogs. So it's hard to find commercial kibbles that are air dried or dried on a low heat or what have you. That said, a lot of these kibbles also are nutritionally complete. So they've been kind of rigorously tested to make sure that they contain all of the necessary nutrients, micro and macro, for a dog to kind of survive. And so when you're going about making your own dog food or creating your own dog meals, it's very hard to ensure that they're getting the right amount, just as it is for us, for yourself. Make sure they're getting the right amount of essential minerals or nutrients or whatever. We do kind of a mix of commercial kibbles that seem to have good kind of practices, and that are certified and whatever. And we mix it up between, I want to say, what, Blue Wilderness or some of these
Yeah,
other
yeah.
kind
I've
of,
used that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
Wolf something. There's a bunch out there. Red Barn, I think, is another one, that are fairly transparent about their production practices and kind of what's in there. And I like ones that include things like glucosamine, because, as I said, well, it may not be great for joints. It does seem to be kind of a longevity drug for humans, and so one would hope it would be for dogs as well. So getting that kind of stuff worked in there. But then we'll do some kind of our own food preparation sometimes with things like salmon, um, pumpkin for fiber, psyllium husk, things like that, to help with digestion. So we do a bit of a mix, but yeah, that was kind of the hardest thing to research, quite
Mhm.
honestly, in that whole series.
Yeah. I looked at it a little bit. So I have a giant schnauzer and who just turned a year old. And
Oh,
so
nice.
I mean, I'm sure I haven't done the research that you have, but I looked into it a little bit. And basically what I found is, I agree, there's a lot of parallels in that, most of the dry food that we're getting is just, processed crap,
Yeah.
just like we humans eat. We
Yeah.
eat a lot of processed crap. And that's usually my biggest advice. My listeners have heard this is, as we talk about diet and nutrition, is eat real foods. Whether you're doing keto, carnivore, Mediterranean, whatever, eat real whole foods.
Yeah.
Cut out the seed oils and the dyes and all the processed stuff. And so, what I found in my brief research was that really dogs should be eating, like more of a carnivore-ish, kind of
Mhm.
real meats and raw foods
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. But who can afford that? So you've got to balance that out. My sister actually does that with her cats, and I don't know how much she spends, but they order it's just meat. Basically what it is. It comes in
Yeah.
the mail, and I feel like that's probably best. But with like a giant schnauzer, the amount they're going to eat, I mean, golly, that's gonna be expensive. And so,
That'll be, yeah, yeah. And you can, yeah, like you said, you can kind of walk the line between them a little bit and do a mix or kind of alternate a little bit, which is kind of what we do. But yeah, I mean, dogs, unlike cats, which are obligate carnivores, they have to eat meat in order to survive because their body can't produce a lot of the amino acids that's in meat. Dogs actually evolved some genes that allow them to process and get nutrients from carbohydrates because they co-evolved, eating with humans, basically.
mhm, yeah,
So it's not as crucial to make sure that they're only eating meat as it is with cats.
yeah,
Obviously, still better, I think, for them.
yeah. Well, very good. Yeah, speaking of dogs, I bring mine up here to my clinic, and
Oh yeah,
it's his supper time, so he's out here. I'm
they
still,
know, they know. His
yeah,
ours has got an internal clock that
yeah,
is shocking.
yeah. So he's fussing at me to come on, but yeah. So you even I see you rate some of the longevity conferences. Do you ever go to some of these conferences?
We were planning to go in 2020, and obviously that didn't happen. We're hoping to get some stuff in this year. I know Radfest is coming up, and then the Live Long summits, I think, are going to be happening out in California. Although I don't know how that's going to be impacted with fires.
Hmm.
Um, but no, I have not attended any in person. Rachel did, an online Rad Fest a couple of years ago and had a great time. But I think those kinds of in-person events are super valuable. I'm also been very interested in getting down to Honduras to look at, the kind of the pop-up longevity city thing that they're doing down there, Vitalia, I think it's called. Yeah, I think there's a lot of benefit to being in person with folks, and we just haven't had the time yet.
Yeah, well, very nice. Well, all right. So the
Speaking of
website
dogs.
is longevityadvice.com. So easy to remember. And like I said, for people listening, there's just all kind of information on here. You've got all kind of articles on various subjects as we've just, talked about some. And so to encourage people to go in and check that out. Anything else you want to throw out before we kind of wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd just reiterate the point that doing this research yourself doesn't have to be intimidating. You go to PubMed, you search the topic you're interested in, pull up three or four research papers, and actually read through them, and you'll be surprised at how much you'll understand, even if you don't have any kind of science or medical background.
Yeah. Okay. Um, well, as we wrap up here, I always ask my guest if they could give us one health tip that would make us healthier today. And you research all this stuff, so sometimes it's hard to pick one. But if you had to pick one, what would you tell us?
Well, so this is one I actually just recently learned when I was researching kind of the top longevity foods that, that I thought was kind of a fun hack, which is garlic is a great longevity food, a lot of kind of healthy polyphenols and things within there. But if you cook it as most people do in high heats, a lot of those can break down. And you can lose a lot of that benefit. However, there's a research study that showed if you chop it up and then wait at least 10 minutes before cooking it, you actually preserve a lot of those polyphenols. And I think the reason is that there's something going on with some oxygen reaction that's happening when you chop it up and expose more of it to air. But whatever it does, it kind of strengthens those and allows them to survive the heating process longer. So if you're cooking with garlic, wait 10 minutes after chopping before throwing it in your dish, and you'll be even healthier.
There you go. All right. Well, very nice. Um,
Cool.
my dog's barking at me. I don't know if you can hear him in the background, but he's like, let's go.
Mine just did as well.
Well, all right. Well, JP, really appreciate it with the longevity advice. Again, longevityadvice.com. Really appreciate everyone listening. This stuff's just right up my alley. So I will actually probably be spending some more time on this website as well, just looking over stuff. So always nice to make these kind of connections. Enjoy like-minded people. So certainly
Sure.
appreciate everyone listening, and we will talk to you next time.
Thanks so much, Craig.
Thank you for listening to FitRx. I invite you to share this with friends and family. If you would like, you can check out our website at vibrantlifedc.com, or you can email me at drgreg@vibrantlifedc.com.